Make a psychological analysis of why did that happen? And he was sitting there eating the food, and all the monkeys were watching from a distance. And I understood that European man, he had physical strength that the monkeys couldn't compare to, but they sensed fear in him. Because obviously he didn't live with monkeys so much in Germany. They sensed fear. And that little Nepalese boy, he had no fear. Because he had no fear, they feared him. Very powerful lesson. The nature of fear. When people sense fear, you're vulnerable. And the monkeys were expert at exploiting that vulnerability. One of the greatest powers of life is to be fearless in whatever we do. And one of the greatest impediments is fear on every level. Then I was tested. The little boy saw me sitting under the tree watching. And he came up to me and took out of the bag a bundle of bananas and offered them to me. As soon as he went to give me the bananas, all the monkeys were going, they were getting really excited. And I told him, he didn't speak English. I just said, no, I don't want bananas. I realized that they sensed fear in me. So they were very excited that they were going to get those bananas. So I said, you keep the bananas. Another day I traveled up to Swayambhunath, and it was the monsoon rain season. And I just decided to take a walk. I was living at under a tree near the monkey temple on a mountain. And I just walked about 3-4 kilometers, and then I was coming back through rice paddies. And then, rice paddies during the monsoon, they're really thick with mud and water, and there's just those little borders that you could walk on. So I was walking on the border, and I saw massive dark clouds forming in the sky, and I heard thunder, and I saw lightning, and I realized there was going to be a massive storm. So I looked for shelter. But in that rice paddy, there was no trees. There was no buildings. To every horizon, there was only paddies. But a distance away, I saw what looked like one old man. He was the only other human as far as the eyes could see. And he was carrying an umbrella. I decided I'm going to get under that umbrella. So I was running, those borders of rice paddies and the wet, you're slipping, but I somehow ran behind him and went right up against him under his umbrella as the rain was pouring on the umbrella. We walked about 15-20 minutes. He never looked back, I guess because he was wondering who was a stranger. And also, it's hard to turn around when you're on a little border. And finally, it stopped raining. And I was going the wrong direction, so I thanked him. And for the first time, this person turned around. And he dropped the umbrella right in the mud. He looked at me. He screamed. And I looked at him. And I screamed. It was Gary, my friend, who I left in that cave in the Isle of Crete a year ago. And we had no communication whatsoever. We were walking as the only two human beings in this entire massive rice paddy under the same umbrella. And we just recognized each other. Gary happens to be visiting India now. If you don't believe this story, you could ask him. But I taught him how to hitchhike the way sadhus do. Back in those days, you jump through the window of a third-class train. And by the time you get in, it's so crowded, no ticket collectors could fit. So it's free. That's what the sadhus taught me. So we were going through this train, and there was a massive storm. And the train was stuck in this field somewhere in Uttar Pradesh. We were going to Kashmir, to Amarnath, because there was a pilgrimage there. I was taking my friend we took trains to Varanasi, and from Varanasi we were going to closer to Amarnath. The train was in one place in this field that was flooded for about 20 hours. There was no seats, there was no food, there was no water. The air was highly recycled by all these humans packed in. And finally, after over a day of just sitting in one place, and it was very hot, something about human nature is stagnancy, is so irritating. Just moving was like mukti, it was like liberation. We're moving, we're actually moving. And the train stopped at 5 in the morning in the pitch dark at the first station for so long, and we were thinking, let's go out and get some water and breathe some air and move, and then we'll jump back into the train. So we did that, and the train started moving, and we tried to get back in, but it was so crowded, we couldn't get in. The train was gone. We had no idea where we were. After some time, the people who couldn't get in the train left the platform. The people who came off the train left the platform, and we were kind of alone. Gary said to me, now what? I said, I don't know. So I asked somebody, where are we? There was a sadhu sitting with a little fire on the platform. And I said, where are we? And he stood up and said, this is Mathura, Krishna's birthplace. And today is Janmashtami, Krishna's birthday. Let me take you to Krishna's birthplace. So I went. And it's a long story. It was very crowded. A day or two later, Gary wanted to go to the Himalayas, and I said, I'll meet you at Haridwar, and then we'll go to Amarnath. I told him, under this clock at Brahmagat, we will meet at this time on this day. And I was sleeping on the bank of the Yamuna River. And the morning I was supposed to leave, I couldn't move. I had typhoid fever. And by the time I got better, I just loved that place so much. And the concept of bhakti, unconditional love, applying this spirit of seva, or selfless service, to whatever we do. Whether we're kings or sadhus, whether we're in business, whether we're in politics, whether we're farmers, whatever we may do. Yat karoshi yat ashnasi yat juhoshi tadasi yat yatapasyasi konti yat tat kurushu madarapanam. If we do it in a spirit of devotion, we can attain the supreme perfection. This so much satisfied my heart. And about 6 months later, Prabhupada came there, and I understood where I wanted to go. Now I'm going to fast forward to last year. This was all happening 1970-71. I get invited to many different places to speak. And there's one man, his name is Mike Milken. He's a very prominent investor in the United States. And he has every year the Milken Global Conference. And very, very top CEOs, presidents of universities, of corporations, powerful people in sports and politics and in entertainment, they come there. And I think there's like 4,000 people come. So they rent out the whole Beverly Hills Hotel every year. And there's different presentations. So somehow I met him, and he had me give some lectures to his dearest friends. And then he invited me to give lectures every morning at his global conference. I think I was the first spiritual person he ever invited for that. So I was he wanted me to give morning meditations with a. One day, he very much insisted that I come to one presentation in the big ballroom of the hotel. And it was a presentation on true leadership. And there was a panel of 5 people. Are you interested in the story? Now I'm a Swami, but I was very affected by this. One was someone named Steve Wynn. Is that his name? He owns, I think he's the biggest casino and hotel owner in the world. He owns the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas and all these places. Another was the CEO and president of Safeway Foods, one of the largest grocery markets in America. Another was the CEO president of a pharmaceutical research company that found more cures for cancer than anyone else in history, I think. And Mike Milken was there as the moderator. And the other person was one of the 5 most successful baseball managers in history. You all know baseball? Okay. What interested me, a few things, is they're talking about true leadership. These are all American people. Very top-rated American people. And I counted 5 times they quoted Mahatma Gandhi. And the conclusion of the whole session was they put words of Mahatma Gandhi on this very computerized board that they were using. And Mike Milken, he's a statistical person. He had these statistics, which years and years of research. He was explaining how he had a graph. I don't remember the specifics of the graph, but I'll tell you the general principle. That if a person is not paid enough to have a comfortable life, then you don't get their full potential of performance. You have to give them enough, and he had the numbers there, so that they're actually not worried about the little things in life. They feel secure and comfortable. And when you give them that much, he showed, the performance of the person goes up dramatically. But then according to the graph, any amount of money you give him more than that, or her, any amount more, there's no increase in the person's performance. If you give them hundreds and thousands of dollars more, there's no increase in the performance. But according to the graph, if you make them feel valued, if you make them feel that their contribution is really important, if you really deeply make them feel appreciated, it goes way, way up. And these are top business people. I'm a little Swami, that's what I teach. I was thinking, this is fascinating. That affection, appreciation is so powerful. Beyond the comfort zone, more powerful even than money as a motivator. And he asked each of these panelists what the most meaningful thing they've ever done in life is. And before he asked the question, he gave the highlights of these people's lives. And he went to Joe Torre, who was a manager of the New York Yankees. And he wrote how the New York Yankees were in the biggest slump they ever had. They hadn't gotten into a World Series for 10 years. So the owner, he hired Joe Torre to be their manager. Now, Joe Torre was a Hall of Fame baseball player. He was a great player, but he wasn't people didn't think he was a good manager. So the New York press was just blasting against the Yankees. They were calling Joe Torre the worst names. They were saying he's useless, he's going to ruin this team, he has no capabilities, and they were just television, he was just being slaughtered. But he took the job. And in the next 10 years that he was manager, they were in 6 World Series and he won 4 World Series. And he was one of the 5 greatest managers in baseball history. So Mike Milken said, what is the most fulfilling accomplishment you did in your life? And he just kind of looked down. And he said, compared to this lady next to me who cures people of cancer, I've never done anything. Now there were 3,000 people in this room. It was a beautiful banquet room with tables and everyone was eating their dinners and I was drinking water. It was kind of vegetarian because Mike Milken's a vegetarian actually. But we were sitting there and he said, and Mike Milken said, you may say this, but he said, how many people out there are New York Yankee fans? Probably about 2,000 people raised their hands. He said, we think you've done a lot of things that are very significant. What was most fulfilling? And he had tears in his eyes. He started telling his life story. He said, when I was a little boy, I suffered so bad. My father was an alcoholic, and he was so abusive to my mother, and so abusive to our children. He said, as a little boy, I lived in fear. Going home was like torture. To hear screaming, to hear yelling, to see fighting, to be beat up. He said it was terrible. I suffered so bad. He said, I lived in New York. He said, the only relief I had in my life was I would go out and play baseball. It wasn't just playing. when I played, all of my frustrations, all of my anxieties, I was releasing in baseball. And by getting absorbed in baseball, I was forgetting the sufferings of home. He said, that's why I became such a great baseball player. That's why I'm in the Hall of Fame. He said, the most fulfilling thing I ever did in my life was not winning World Series, was not entering the Hall of Fame, was not becoming the most popular man in New York City, which he was. He said, I started a foundation of helping children from abusive homes. And we put counselors, and we put psychologists, and we put all sorts of support systems in different schools of New York where children are suffering the same way I did. And we help them to get through it. He said, when I see these little children who come in totally afraid, he said, they felt like I was. That we are totally worthless. We're not worth anything in this world. He said, there's nothing more painful than feeling like that. When I see them smile, because we could make them see their potential, see their value. He said, that is the greatest fulfillment of my life, more than any other accomplishment. After he said that, the only time in this whole session, he got a standing ovation, and I saw practically everybody there. There was presidents of countries, presidents of universities, presidents of corporations. There was governors of states. They were all sitting there. I saw tears in their eyes as they were clapping. Because he was genuine. He touched their hearts. And after the standing ovation, you know what he said? He said, I have to tell you, this whole foundation was all my wife's idea. It wasn't my idea. I'm just trying to assist her. That was quite revolutionary. He didn't even take credit for that. And that gave him even more satisfaction. So a Swami who's focused on spiritual ideals, why was I so inspired by that? Because it's human nature. In the deepest instincts of our hearts, compassion is what brings the greatest fulfillment, the greatest satisfaction. And is actually the highest purpose of our life. More than all the other things we can ever do. And he was able to do what he did because he was so famous. And he did have so much wealth, and he did have so much influence. But he used it for a purpose of compassion. In other words, he was an instrument of love. And that's what spirituality is meant to do on the deepest level, to connect us with that love. We call Krishna the supreme source of everything that exists, the all-beautiful person. To connect with that love and to be an instrument of that love is where the deepest purpose, meaning, and fulfillment can be found. In everyone. It's not a sectarian concept. These are a few lessons. Now I'm going to tell one more short story. Can you imagine my poor parents when I was on this journey? Their 19-year-old son. He was going for a summer vacation between college semesters to Europe, promised to be back in 2.5 months, and never came home. My father and mother, they worried so much. They were very traditional, caring Jewish parents. My father was a businessman who worked very hard, very well connected. They would get letters from me. Well, they didn't hear from me for about a month after I was supposed to come home. Then they got this little letter. It was an aerogram saying, I'm no longer with Gary. I decided to find an understanding of how people of the East see the world. So I'm hitchhiking to India. Please do not worry about me. There was no return address. Every now and then he'd get a letter from me saying I'm living in a cave in jungles of Himalayas. I thought he would be proud of me, my mother. But they thought I was insane. They were so worried. But I knew in my heart, I just had this feeling that because I'm doing this for a higher purpose to serve God and humanity, in the end, they will be proud. It took some years, but my father's in Bombay now. He's 89 years old. When my mother passed away, because they had come to India several times just to meet the people here, to see what we were doing here. When my mother passed away, she told the family, something that never was done in any of our generations, to cremate her. Jews don't do this. Cremate my body and ask Radhanath-Swami to bring my ashes to India. And the whole family, oh yes, this is what we want. So proud, so happy. And when I put her ashes in the Ganga, there were 3,000 devotees chanting prayers. And I was thinking, how beautiful. The mother of my physical body is now merging into Mother Ganga, one of my most holy spiritual mothers. And with tears in my eyes, I offered a little prayer. Mother Ganga, please bring my mother to the sea of Krishna's grace. And I remember standing there watching her ashes in the current, thinking this is bhakti, to harmonize the material with the spiritual, to harmonize our talents, to harmonize our whatever we may have with the very nature of our hearts, the nature of our souls. Thank you very much. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Give any comments or anything? Yes, please.
Meeting Gary as a spiritual person, how would you attribute to? Is it a miracle? Gary holding the umbrella and you're meeting in a no man's land. You can't even imagine. How do you attribute this phenomenon?
It's impossible for me to believe it was a coincidence. We were best of friends from 10 years old. We went on so many journeys together, and at a certain point we separated because my yearning for spirituality had become so intense and he just couldn't follow that. So he went west and I went east. How we were both together in that rice paddy, I believe it was a divine arrangement. I believe it was the grace of God. And that's just one little story of, if you read The Journey Home, the dynamics of what happens with Gary and I, that's just one part. It's actually quite incredible. I remember after Gary called my name and I called his name under that umbrella, the first thing Gary said, "No one will ever believe this." But most everybody does believe it. Because the nature of the world, if we really go deep into any aspect of this world, everything is unbelievable. How we're born is unbelievable. You know, the father and the mother come together and a little seed is transferred from the fathers into the mother. And that little seed, what is the size of that seed? What does it look like? And somehow or other, just by the emulsification of the ovum and the semen, that little seed starts to grow. And it grows limbs and senses and eyes and ears and tongue and nose, and a little brain starts forming, and hearts and livers and lungs and kidneys and pancreases. How's all that happening? You know, we can say from a genetics perspective, you know, how it's working, but incredible orchestration. Is there an intelligence behind it, or is it all happening by accident? It's unbelievable. Every person we see, how they were born, is an unbelievable thing. Every tree, from a banyan tree, little seed falls. Who can understand that recently I was in the Muir Woods in California where there's these redwood trees, the biggest trees in the world, the sequoia. And I'm looking at these little seeds, thinking, in the little seed this big, there's a sequoia tree this big. I was at one sequoia tree, it's called the President Grant tree in Kings Canyon. And I did some research about that tree. If 40 adults held their hands, they could go around the base of the tree. 39 couldn't do it. You know what basketballs are? If you hollowed out that tree, you could fit 170,000 basketballs, or 2.2 million table tennis balls. And if you put petrol in that hollowed out trunk of the tree, you could drive around the world over 2 times without filling up for gas. It's a huge tree. And right next to it's a little seed. I'm thinking, one of these trees is in, this tree was inside of a seed this big. It's unbelievable. And I was thinking of Bombay during the monsoons. You know those big clouds? Usually once a year there's a downpour that floods the city. The airports are closed, the railways are closed, the buses are closed. I remember where our temple is in K.M. Munshi Marg in Chopati. One time I would look during the monsoons, it was so flooded that people with rowboats were going down the street because no cars could go. And all that water is stored in a cloud. And the cloud is so light it's floating in the sky. It has all that water in it and floating in the sky. You know, why doesn't it just fall down and crush us all? There's quadrillions of gallons of water there. Now by trucks to bring that much water in, how many tankers would it take? But that water, it's just in the sky and a little breeze is moving it all. There's scientific explanations. But, you know, how and why it's doing, it's actually unbelievable. Everything we see in this world is unbelievable. But the question is, are our hearts and eyes open to see the beauty and the miracles of the world around us? Or are we just so caught up that we just see everything as ordinary? You know, the spiritual path is to be perceptive of the miraculous grace that's really all around us and within us. And this chanting of God's names, this mantra, it cleanses the mind from all of the envy and greed and selfish lust and arrogance that just, because all of these, and illusion and anger, all of these things are like dust in a mirror. They prevent us from seeing who we really are and understanding what we really want. But if our heart is cleansed from this obsessive egoism, then we can actually, it doesn't make us less productive. Which is a more powerful force, greed or love? A mother's love, she'll do anything for her child. She'll struggle 24 hours a day without sleep. She's not getting paid for it, but she loves her child. When we clean our heart of all of these anarthas, all of these unwanted pollutions, then we could see the real love that's within us, the beauty within us. And then we can actually, once we see it within us, we can see that beauty within others, within nature. And we could be an instrument. And then, yes, you know, we can, some of the most great productive, Gandhi, he worked hard, but he was doing it out of compassion. My guru, Srila Prabhupada, at 70 years old, he went on a cargo ship, suffering heart attacks, seasickness, had no money, arrived in New York City after 38 days, and gave his life and soul out of love for people. So yes, you know, to be dynamic, to be productive, to be creative, to utilize our full potential in what we do, but to be motivated by compassion is where not only we can do great things, but we could give something that's most critically needed in the world. that's an example. And that's where that satisfaction could come. So meeting Gary in that rice paddy, under that umbrella, and walking with him without even knowing, either one of us, who we were, for a half hour, it was just one of those little beautiful miracles of life that are actually all around us. I hope that answers your question. Is there any other questions?